Hey Mike, so I told you I was going to make you a video. This would kind of be maybe a little two-part thing, um, talking a little bit about what it is that you do when you do dry fire. And you said you kind of just post up some targets and start kind of pointing the gun at them to practice some transitions and practice some reloads and things. Um, what I wanted to get in is kind of just a little bit more specifics as to what it is that you actually are looking at when you're focusing on your or practicing your transitions. Um, a lot of people think that as long as they're just moving the gun from one target to the next, that's practicing transitions. And I guess for all intents and purposes, it is. However, we don't tend to drive home accuracy being the key thing, or how to call our shots more accurately, and or focusing on exactly what point we're driving the gun or driving the sights to in order to better call better shots. So I'm sure you've kind of witnessed now to where when you see a target, especially in your live fire, and you bring the gun from one target to the next, and you kind of see brown, and you put the gun in front of the brown, and you press the trigger, and lo and behold, you might have an alpha and a Charlie, or two Charlies, or an alpha and a Delta, or Charlie and a Delta. But it's really hard to call those two A shots. So I'm going to show you kind of what I do, or specifically what I do when it comes to what I do in dry fire, and how I then transfer that to live fire, and what I focus on to ensure that the shots I'm calling are exactly what they need to be, and I'm hitting the parts of the target that I want to be hitting. So when we do transitions, let me switch this camera around. When we do transitions, we're looking at, one target here, and then we transfer the gun to the next target. So the problem with that, though, is if we're just we're drawing the gun to one target, and then we're just moving the gun to the next target, what exactly is our focus when we move the gun from one target to the next? And a lot of times, if I ask a shooter, in any of my classes, if I ask a shooter, what exactly is it that you're focused on, or what are you looking at? 99% of the time, the shooter's like, well, I'm bringing the gun over to the next target, and that's what I'm looking at. So then I generally follow that question up with, when you move the gun from one target to the next, do your eyes lead the gun, or does the gun tend to lead and then your eyes follow? Or do you think you're maybe possibly tracking the two together kind of at the same time? And most of the time, the shooters will tell me, well, I'm moving the gun over there and then picking up the next target and pulling the shots, or I'm moving the gun and my eyes together at the same time. And what I like to see, and what I want to try to quantify, is you actually should be leading the gun with your eyesight, and you're not trying to drive the gun or over muscle the gun from one target to the next. So it's not a matter of and really trying to wrestle the gun from one target to the next. It's all about just leading the gun with the eyes. So as you see one target, you pull the gun up to that target, you press the shots, then you move your eyes to the next target, and as soon as you spot on that target where you want the sights to be, your hands will automatically lead the gun right to where it needs to be so your eyes can see it. So when I talk about specific points, I mean specific. So let me illustrate here on a little bit different target. So these are my typical dry fire targets, which are basically just third scale targets that I've made. I've cut them out of just a standard cardboard. So as you can see, there's no A zone, B zone, D zone, or anything like that. They're just simply just static cardboard. So now when I dry fire, I still want to call my shots exactly as I would if I were looking at a standard USPSA or IPSC target, which if there's the letter A in the center, that's where I want to be focusing the front sight of the gun. So that's what my eyesight, that's what all my attention to detail goes to, as I drive my eyes first from one target to the next target. So before I bring the gun to it, if I was to pull the trigger, it'd be bang, bang. Now my eyes immediately avert to the next target. I'm picking up the center of the target, and then I bring the gun to that exact spot on the target, focus on the front sight, bang, bang. So that's all happening at the fastest pace possible. So kind of like when Steve Anderson talked about, the front sight is your speedometer. It's what's You can't outshoot the front sight. If you do, then obviously that's when misses and deltas and things like that happen. So kind of a thing I like to think about is nobody plans to shoot C's, nobody plans to shoot D's. So, you know, when you really consciously think about it, you know, nobody consciously says, oh, I'm going to pull the gun up and I'm going to aim at the D zone, or I'm going to aim at the C zone. No. Everybody takes the time and they want to shoot A's. Well, if you're taking the time to shoot A's or to aim at A's, you've got enough time there and you've taken enough time to then call A's and shoot A's. So to kind of illustrate my point a little bit, though, with a target that is kind of set up with all the outlines, I use this for illustration purposes when I'm doing classes and stuff too, just so I don't have to carry around a big target. But as you can see, we've got an A zone, a C zone, a D zone. Of course, it's set up exactly like a USPSA target. So you can kind of do the same thing even on any of your dry fire targets. Is maybe perhaps take a Sharpie or something and highlight just exactly that center A. So when I'm bringing the gun, especially on an open target, and I'm working on transitions, let's say on open targets only, my focal point as I'm moving my eyesight and driving my eyes from one target to the next, my eyesight isn't just I see brown, I stop the gun, I press the trigger. It's I see center A zone, my eyes stop. Center A zone, the gun follows, the front sight stops. Center A zone, focus goes from target on the A to front sight, depending on the amount of sight focus I need to have. Whether that's a hard front sight focus, like on a farther target, we're talking 20, 25 yards or further, or kind of a soft front sight focus, which is, you know, what I would consider 10 to 15 yards, something like that, or almost just a solid target focus, which is basically you're looking at the target and just kind of bringing the sights into your eyesight. You're kind of looking through the sights, more of a harder target focus and pressing the shot, which is easy to do and is kind of, I guess some people kind of describe it as like point shooting, even though it's not point shooting. You're just using a very, very, very fast, very target focused, but you're still looking through the sights in order to pull those shots. And those are typically done at targets that are arm's length away to 3 or 4 yards away. So like I said, when you're doing your transitions, the main thing to focus on is get the eyes moving before the gun and bring the sights to your eyes. So move the eyes, then snap the gun to the eyes, and that's going to be exactly the spot on the target you wanted to aim. You'd be amazed at what it's going to do for your accuracy as well as your consistency, and you'll like it. Okay, so we've talked about target transitions and what exactly it is that we're focused on when we're driving our eyesight and driving the gun from one target to the next. The same can be said for not only the paper targets, you know, but a lot of times a lot of guys will say, man, I can shoot paper targets with the best of them, but as soon as it comes to steel, man, my steel game is terrible. And I generally follow that up with something that was taught to me by another shooter by the name of Elias Frangoulis, out in Arizona, who once told me that 99 and 9/10% of people always, you aim at paper, but those same people tend to just shoot at steel. So you understand the difference. So they're aiming at paper, because obviously you're not just shooting at paper. If you shoot at paper, you're willing to accept Charlies and Deltas. You know, so obviously if we're aiming at paper, we're aiming at the A zone. Well, a steel target is just like a paper target. It has a center point or center aiming point to it as well. So, you know, when we start seeing things like mini poppers and US poppers, which are the large poppers and things like that, or steel plates, so many people, they see white, they immediately just bring their sights to the edge of white. So kind of like on this dry fire target here. As soon as they sweep the gun just across the center, you know, the edge of white, bang, they're trying to pull the shot, and lo and behold, of course, they miss. So they're throwing 3 and 4 and 5 shots at a piece of steel in order to get it to drop. I would think that obviously you would be better served, just like everybody that I tell this to aim at steel. And when I mean aim, you're not aiming, you know, at this outside edge, you're not aiming at the head, you're aiming at what they call the calibration zone, which is that center part right there. And not only are you just aiming at the center part, you're aiming at the center of the center part of that, which is right there. So just like your paper targets have an A zone that you're actually aiming at, that's what you're putting the front sight to and pressing the trigger to call good shots at center mass and center A's. The same can be said for center of the popper. Press through the trigger. Don't rush the trigger. Don't hurry the trigger. Don't snap it. Press through the trigger and call a good shot center of the steel. And again, your confidence is going to skyrocket because you're able to hit every single thing that you're able to call the shots on. See the sights for what they need to be, press the trigger through, and you're moving on. So that's what I wanted to get into as far as what you should be looking at when you're dry firing. So the thing about it is if you're trying to beat these crazy par times, like I'm sure you've heard of like Ben Steger's books and Steve Anderson's books. The great thing about them is they give you these, you know, pretty tight time constraints as far as par times and what you should be striving to get to. Unfortunately, a lot of times, though, we tend to be so much focused on the speed of how things are being done that we forget that there's actually a technique in there that we need to remember as well. And that technique, of course, is to focus on the front sight and make sure that we are calling and we're being 100% honest with ourselves that we're calling good shots every single time that we snap that trigger in dry fire. Because if we don't, then we can't be honest with ourselves when we go to live fire, and when we transfer those skills to live fire, we realize real quick that, man, those par times that I had in dry fire that I was able to hammer out, I can't even get double that time in live fire without getting misses. So, and those misses come from the fact that you weren't properly doing your dry fire and being honest and sincere with yourself enough to know what it was you were or weren't seeing when it came to front sight focus and trigger control. So I'm going to follow this part of the video up with a little bit of a live fire demonstration that I did a little earlier today, where I've actually got the camera focused directly on me and my face. Kind of the same view, but of me shooting. And what I really want you to focus on is as fast as I get the gun up and out to the target, what my eyesight's doing. So what are my eyes looking at? And then, of course, as I'm shooting the gun, you know, I want you to really be able to see that my eyes are actually then moving to the target before the gun is moved there. So again, it's leading the gun with the eyes. Everything we do, we need to lead with the eyes. So just like when I'm sure you've kind of heard, obviously during a reload, when you get the gun up, you know, you drop that magazine out, you reach into grab the next magazine, and then you're looking that magazine into the bottom of the magwell of the gun. Again, you're leading that magazine with your eyes to the magwell. And then, of course, once the magazine hits the magwell and you're pressing the gun back out on target, as you're rolling that gun back out on target, your eyesight is, again, leading the front sight back to your aiming point on the target. So everything that we do in the sport, or everything that we do, period, is led with our eyesight. So anyway, like I said, I'm going to follow this up with a short little live fire demonstration I did. And again, I want you to focus on exactly how quickly my eyes are moving. And I'm not over muscling the gun. I'm not trying to drive the gun, other than just allowing my hands to move the gun from one target to the next. And I'm doing it all with just leading with my eyes and letting my body follow.